Hey everybody, Plushie here, and as always, I apologize for how late I am releasing this video. Tonelico's banner is literally ending within a day, but I have been very caught up by the daily servant buffs from this anniversary, therefore I've been putting this off for quite a while, but finally we can get into this year's anniversary hot take of the anniversary servant. Tonelico has certainly been a pretty controversial release in terms of her power level because her skill 3 is pretty awkward but also extremely interesting. So today let's take a look at whether Tonelico actually has a fatal flaw, or are people just giving her a lot of crap for no reason. So Tonelico's first skill is an AoE 10% slow charge for 3 turns. Basically, she gives the entire team, including herself, 10% MP every turn for 3 turns. She also generates 10 stars per turn for 3 turns, and this is also a 50 MP battery for herself. And finally, it increases her own MP damage by 20%, all on a 7-turn cooldown. So this is a very powerful skill. The slow charge for the entire team benefits both farming and challenge quests, and the star per turn as well. Sometimes in farming you do want to incorporate a couple of critical turns, and this can certainly help you with that. This is also a 50 MP battery, which is never bad, and also a sizable steroid for herself, which is a 20% MP damage up. However, this is on a 7-turn cooldown, so if you are familiar with Buster looping already, 7 turn is like 1 turn too long. This basically means unless you are using double Koyanskaya Atlas Academy Mystic Code, you will never be using this skill for a second time, which is kind of a shame. Whenever you are not able to use your steroid skill twice, this actually cripples your damage a lot, and it also affects with your looping. It's still a really solid skill with a good blend of team utility and self buffs. So Tonelico's second skill is a very interesting charisma skill. It gives the entire team a 20% attack up at base, but it updates according to the target's HP value. So if the target has less than 99% HP, which means that if they take any form of damage, this will go up by 10%. If the target has less than 75% HP, this goes up by another 10%, and 50% HP goes up by another 10%, making a 50% attack up. And finally, if the target has lower than 25% of their max HP, this goes up to a whopping 60% attack up. And also this skill has a additional effect which gives Tonelico another 10 star per turn generation effect for 3 turns. However, this only triggers if the entire team has full HP. So meaning if your entire team even gets touched, if one of the member gets touched, this effect is gone. This skill has a 5-turn cooldown. So this is a very interesting charisma skill for sure. This has a couple of synergies with her skill 3 as well, because her skill 3 is an AoE guts. So had the AoE guts procced, basically everyone would be lower than 25% HP, then this would be a 3-turn cooldown, 60% attack up. So obviously it's very strong, but usually you don't want to have your team's HP at that low. But even at, you know, relatively high HP values, let's say 75%, this is a AoE 40% attack up, which is a really good buff, and with it being at a 5-turn cooldown, this is super powerful in challenge quests, especially against bosses that do AoE damage. Or on the flip side, you can solo with Tonelico, because Tonelico's solo ability is pretty okay, and in solos very often you will be lower than 25% HP, and this would become a really insane 60% attack up that has a relatively short cooldown of 5. Overall, this is a really good for both support and sustaining damage. The 10 star per turn at full HP is also pretty nice for farming, and this is very interesting actually, because you can decide whether to include Coin Sky of Light in your farming team, because Coin Sky of Light can actually reduce your party's HP to make this a 30% attack up, or don't include her and get the 10 star per turn for a potential crit turn. This combined with her skill 1 can give you her 20 stars per turn for 3 turns, which is a really big number as well. So overall, I like this skill a lot. It has a short cooldown, good team utility, good self utility. Overall, just really good. And finally, Tonelico's skill 3 perhaps one of the most controversial skills of the year, charges the entire team with 50% MP charge, buffs the entire team with 30% MP damage up for 3 turns, and finally gives the entire team a one-time 3-turn guts that revives them at 3000 HP. So what's the catch? This is obviously really broken. This is almost like an MP effect tied to a skill. Well, the catch is that it's not just a 10-turn cooldown skill, it also starts at 5 turns cooldown. Now this cooldown works as normal, you can reduce it manually with someone like Koyanskaya of Light, but the main gimmick to reducing its cooldown is actually tied to her MP. One of her MP's overcharge effect actually reduces her skill 3's cooldown specifically. So for example, if you use her MP at overcharge 3, her MP will reduce this skill's cooldown by 3 turns, which is pretty interesting. This gives using Tonelico a lot of nuances. You need to pair her with specific teammates that give overcharge in order for this skill to activate early, which usually you do need to do for her to activate this skill in farming. We will get into more of that when we talk about her farming ability. But overall, this skill is just super powerful. As I've said before, this is like an MP power level skill. If you're using this for farming, this is obviously one of the strongest AoE buffs in the entire game. And if you're using this in challenge quests, it is still very powerful team buff. Even if you're not using other damaging MPs, if you're just using her as the sole damage dealer, this can also help your supports get their MP quickly as well. And obviously the AoE guts can, buy you a turn in a pinch. So overall, this is a really good effect in my opinion, very strong, but the problem more so lies in how you actually get to using this skill. Tonelico has a lot of really decent passives, nothing too crazy, but it's all at a very high number. She has Territory Creation EX, which increases her own arts card by 12%, which is really good, helps her refund in solos specifically. It has Item Construction, which increases her own debuff success rate by 6%, doesn't really matter for her. Max Resistance B, which increases her own debuff resistance by 17.5%, which is also pretty nice, but most importantly, she has Fei IC, which increases her own critical attack resistance by 12%. This is a really powerful passive in terms of soloing, because getting crit is one of the most devastating things that can happen to you, and this actually saves her a lot of HP when she's facing off against enemies that crit very often. And finally, Tonelico's MP is an AoE 5-hit Buster MP that gives her a one-time 1-turn invul whenever she MPs. It also deals extra damage against evil enemies, and with Arcawade's bad, precedent set, it also scales with MP level instead of overcharge from 150% at MP1 all the way up to 200% at MP5. This MP also reduces all enemies' defenses by 20% for 3 turns. Unfortunately, that is after damage. And finally, she has 2 overcharge effects. The first one is a buster up that happens before her MP that scales from 30% all the way up to 50%, which already starts at a pretty decent number at 30% at OC1. This obviously helps with her MP damage, but it also helps with her buster card damage if you decide to chain her buster cards after her MP. And of course, the other overcharge effect is the one we mentioned before, which reduces her skill 3's cooldown, and it scales with overcharge as well, with each overcharge adding an additional turn of cooldown reduced from her skill 3. So this is a really good MP, obviously. The first effect is honestly very often overlooked. The one-time 1-turn invul can actually allow her to have instant access to hard defense instead of having to save a hard defensive skill to tank an MP. This also makes her a really decent solo servant, because essentially she's cutting the damage she's taking to 2/3 every single other turn, I would say, because when you use her MP into a mighty chain, she can actually loop her MP pretty easily with the combination of her already pretty decent natural MP gain, her 10% slow charge on her skill 1, and also her 12% arts up passive. So overall, this is a really good effect, really good survival effect, both in teams and solos. Obviously, this also has the this MP has the luxurious factor of allowing her to hit 200% anti-evil if you just have a fat enough copy instead of having to commit overcharge. This means that if you have her at MP5, she can maul down evil enemies just like how Archwade mauls down chaotic enemies. She can definitely fight evil enemies, especially at higher MP levels at neutral damage, and despite her being a caster, she's going to be one of the best anti-evil units in the entire game at a higher MP level. The MP also reduces all enemies' defense by 20% for 3 turns. This is a, stackable steroid effect in challenge quests specifically, because you usually don't move on to the next wave, and on bosses with break bars, this is going to slowly ramp up her damage with the more she MPs, which is honestly pretty okay. It's not like too groundbreaking of an effect, but it's still very solid. And finally, the Buster Up I mentioned before starts at a pretty big number, and the cooldown reduction on her skill 3 is her main gimmick. We'll get more into when we talk about both her farming and her challenge quest performance. So how do I feel about Tonelico? Well, she's very controversial, and most of that actually stems from her ability to farm, so let's get into that one. And let's get the boring one out of the way, which is her ability to farm as a single core Buster Looper. And she can run Black Grail with Double Oberon and Koyanskaya. And this comes with all of the disadvantages of Double Oberon, which means that she will have, a lack of damage in the first 2 waves, and her damage will peak really hard on the final wave. The first 2 waves lack of damage is somewhat mitigated because she can run Black Grail, but if you're running a 6 CE setup with the event CE not significantly boosting her MP damage, you're going to feel a significant lack of damage for the first 2 waves, unfortunately. She's going to obviously also run, a 50 MP start CE with double Koyanskaya Oberon. It all depends on what the event offers you. And overall, I think as a single core Buster Looper, she's among one of the best farming AoE casters still, but it's more so because she doesn't have a lot of strong competition in that category. If you start to try to bring her into neutral territory, you start to feel the 0.9 caster mod and all of that annoying stuff with Double Oberon, and suddenly she's just middle of the pack in terms of Buster looping. In my opinion, Tonelico's true potential lies in her ability to do multi-core farming. Her skill 3 is the strongest effect for multi-core farming if you're able to activate it, and AoE 50% MP charge basically eliminates the need to run any servant with starting MP charge CEs, which gives her a huge advantage. The problem here lies in actually activating that skill fast enough. Now personally, in my opinion and experience, I think if you are only activating the skill on the 3rd wave, it's usually not worth it and overkill. You're charging the entire team's MP gauge to full, but you're usually not triple MPing with your team if you're farming normally. And also, you will be missing out on the 30% AoE MP damage up steroid, as well as you are not able to provide your other members with the MP charge fast enough to enable them to use their MP without any starting MP charge. So my main goal when I'm building a team with Tonelico is to actually use her skill 3 on the 2nd turn, which is kind of difficult. There are 2 prerequisites you have to meet in order for that to happen. The first prerequisite is having a total of 3 turns worth of cooldown reduction on her skill 3, which means that the combination of numbers with overcharge giving and cooldown reduction has to be 3. And the second prerequisite is obviously you having to use her MP on the 1st wave, because obviously the cooldown reduction would not proc if you don't use her MP immediately. I can't really come up with something that is super general that you can just apply to most situations like other good multi-core farmers such as Tezcali Polka and Koyanskaya of Dark, and instead she needs to be paired up with very specific teammates that is able to give her overcharge, or even sometimes with a very special mystic code. Now here is one composition that I will mention here that I think is the most universal composition I can come up with, which is her pairing with Koyanskaya of Dark and the New Year's mystic code. So Koyanskaya of Dark is probably her current best partner in multi-core farming, because she is able to give the entire team 30% MP charge as well as 30% buster up, and finally she is able to give Tonelico a overcharge boost by 2 stages. And this mystic code can also give a target a overcharge boost by 1 extra stage, as well as charge them with 10 MP. So with this team, if you have Tonelico and you unlock her Append 2, the third slot on your team can actually literally be any character you want that doesn't need any, starting charge or doesn't need any self MP charging skills. There are obviously other members that work well with her, mainly members that give overcharge, such as Da Vinci Ruler, who is a great free-to-play option, or someone like Edison, who actually has a combine of 3 ticks of cooldown reduction on her third skill, with him being able to provide overcharge +2 and cooldown -1. But Edison doesn't have any immediately MP charge, so you might have to pair a third member that has some MP charge for Tonelico in order for her to be able to MP on the first turn. You can obviously also run her with Koyanskaya of Light, who is able to reduce her cooldown by 2, which is basically the same as giving 2 stages of overcharge, and you can also just throw in another character that can boost their overcharge by 1 stage or reduce their cooldown by 1. But the problem with Koyanskaya of Light is she doesn't have any AoE buffs, nor does she have any AoE charge, so you might need the third member of your team to do some extra work if you want to farm with this multi-core setup. So overall, yeah, all of that sounds very complicated. I apologize if it's hard to follow, but yeah, once again, that's just how you have to be building your team when you are using Tonelico for multi-core farming. It's a lot of potential, but it also requires a lot of hard work to make it actually function. As of now, I think if your roster doesn't have any of the good members to pair with Tonelico, she's not gonna feel super amazing. You're basically forced back into using single core with Tonelico, which I've mentioned before is pretty good, above average, but not anything revolutionary. So now with that mess out of the way, we can finally talk about her performances in high difficulty quests, and honestly, it's pretty decent. She's able to provide the entire team with a lot of value, as I mentioned before when talking about her skills. Her first skill is a good blend of sustain and, helping her speed up her MP. And her second skill, especially if the boss does AoE damage, is able to provide even your supports with a lot of attack up when you're attacking with their cards. And obviously, now without the pressure of having to activate her skill at a certain turn, you can just run a lot of anything with her. You don't really need to specifically have a lot of characters that reduce cooldown or give overcharge just to, trigger her third skill as much as possible. I've tried a team where it's like Tonelico, Tamamo Caster, and Himiko to try and spam her skill 3, but usually that's not really that worth it because the guts would be wasted at 90% of the time, and the MP damage up would usually also be wasted, and you end up just having a really cute loop that you can keep using all their MPs, but it's not actually nearly as broken as just running her with a normal team with Castoria and a Buster Buffer, for example. And that skill 3 is obviously very powerful for the team. It can, help your team survive a devastating attack, and it can also help your supports instantly get their MP, which sometimes can also bail you out of a sticky situation. But once again, she isn't a super crazy boss killer or anything. She's just a really good, value unit. You can kind of throw her in any team and she would work pretty well. She kind of feels very similar to Morgan, which I guess is very on brand. You can never go wrong with Tonelico in a challenging quest team. She can be, the main damage dealer, she can be the semi-support, she can be whatever, and she will provide your team with a lot of value, even more so than Morgan in my opinion. And you can even run her with Morgan because of the overcharge synergies that Morgan is able to provide. She's really fun to play, but she's not she's not gonna feel like a super top tier boss killer because she's AoE and she's also caster. Unless she's facing against evil enemies, then obviously she's gonna wipe the floor with them, just like how Archwade wipes the floor with chaotic enemies if you have a high MP copy of Tonelico. And the final aspect I want to talk a little bit about is her ability to solo. I have briefly mentioned that before. It's mainly because of her good MP gain that she can get off of a Mighty Chain after she MPs, as well as her MP effect that gives her a one-time, one-turn invul whenever she MPs. This gives her instant access to hard defense, meaning that you don't have to save any of you know, the hard defense skills on your Mystic codes to tank an MP, you can use it at a more optimal timing, and you just save her MP instead to tank an MP. And once again, this effectively blocks off 1/3 of the damage she's going to take whenever she MPs, and with how good her MP gain is and the existence of Mighty Chain, she can do it every other turn. So she's like cutting the damage in half sometimes, even against enemies that can only move twice every other turn, which is a lot of accumulated HP saved up when you are soloing with her. So she's actually surprisingly a good soloer. In conclusion, I think Tonelico is a bundle of potential locked behind a metaphorical door, but that key to the metaphorical door currently does not exist. The closest perfect teammate, quote unquote, that you can pair with her is Koyanskaya of Dark, and obviously she is not the most common servant for people to have, nor is she the most common servant that people actually hyper invest in. And without these specifically good teammates to pair with her, Tonelico is gonna feel a lot worse than she is. Tonelico also heavily benefits from higher MP levels and, you know, her ability to fight evil enemies very effectively. However, if you're not able to actually pull her at a high MP level, I do think she's gonna feel a lot more underwhelming as well. So overall, Tonelico needs a savior, and currently, unfortunately, just like in the story, that savior is nowhere to be seen. So as of now, I can't really recommend her really highly for you just to pull for gameplay. Obviously, if you're lacking a strong AoE caster and you also don't have any good options for AoE alter egos or even berserkers, then Tonelico could be a pretty decent pull for you regardless. But if you already have quite a decent amount of, you know, roster, you might not want to pull for Tonelico, especially if you don't have some of the, you know, better teammates to pair with her in your roster. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. I apologize for how late this video is. Once again, it's literally one day, you know, less than a day before Tonelico's banner leave, but I hope you still enjoyed, and still, best of luck to you for rolling for Tonelico, because she is Summer Morgan after all, and so many people have been waiting for Summer Morgan. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed, and let's look forward to Summer 8 this year.